Hi, this is Guanxi again. This is the final lesson of this China Essentials Blueprint. Today we're going to kind of tie everything that we've discussed in the first two videos together. So first we talked about the honeymoon period and kind of why people behave the way they behave. We extended that to understanding what Chinese Guanxi is, and the way that people behave is really to develop Guanxi relationships, which is based on a system of reciprocity and the exchange of goodwill. Now, the reason that we do all of this is because ultimately we want to develop successful business relationships or partnerships in China. If you're kind of like a small to medium company, or even if you're a large multinational company, really to be successful in any kind of endeavor, business endeavor in China, you need Chinese partners. Okay. Now the general idea is that if you're a foreigner and you don't speak Chinese, you quote unquote, you need a local partner. So that's kind of your mindset when you go out and you start trying to find somebody who can do the things that you need. From my experience, the reason why majority of the partnerships that are formed in China between Chinese people and Americans or non-Chinese people, a lot of them ultimately fail, and a lot of them ultimately become dysfunctional. And what the general perception of Americans is that, well, they weren't the right partner to begin with. They had a different system of values. They had corrupt intentions. They started stealing from us. They started, skimming off the top. There was a lot of unethical and corrupt behavior. These are the typical complaints, and I'm sure that you've heard many of them before. You may even have experienced some of these in your own business dealings in China. So the general thing that I always advise is when you go to China and you think you want a local partner, that actually sets you up for failure. Basically what you should be looking for is the right partner. And the right partner will probably have local language skills. The right partner will probably be Chinese. But the right partner also has to be kind of in sync with the long-term goal that you are trying to achieve. Now what happens is a lot of experts will say that, well, you have to align on values, because if you share similar values, then it can be a successful long-term relationship. I actually think that's the wrong approach, because sometimes aligning on values, there's two things. One, it's almost impossible to align on values. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia. How could I possibly share a similar system of values with somebody who was born and raised in mainland China, where it's a single-party system of government? Free speech isn't protected like it is in the United States. It's officially an atheist country. And everything is based on a hierarchical relationship that goes all the way back to Confucius, where the primary goal of society is to maintain social harmony, not to promote equal and individual rights. So it's almost impossible that you find somebody that shares, quote unquote, the same values. The real key to success in forming successful partnerships is to align on process. Okay? And it's very important to understand how the Chinese concept of negotiations and partnering is actually quite different than what we as Americans would generally perceive as how you begin to start collaborating and forming business partnerships. I'll just give you the most straightforward example. So when you enter into quote-unquote negotiations, and we have an entire module on negotiating with Chinese people, but generally speaking, when you enter into negotiations, the objective of negotiating is what? It's to get the contract signed. It's for you and your partner to agree on the terms of the arrangement, who contributes what, and then everybody knows what our mutual expectations are, and then we sign on the dotted line and we put the stamp on it, and bam, the negotiations are over. Well, in China, it happens to work completely the opposite. Now, it doesn't work the opposite in theory. It works the opposite in practice. And what do I mean by that? It means that for the majority of Chinese people, after the contractual agreement is signed, where we think, okay, the negotiations are over, for most Chinese people, the negotiations has just begun. Okay, we actually don't officially start forming our relationships. We actually don't start negotiating how we're going to work together until after we sign the contract. Okay, so the contract doesn't define how we collaborate. It's just the starting point. For Americans, it's actually the end. Okay, negotiations are over. For Chinese, it's a starting point. And this goes directly into the Chinese system of Guanxi and the Chinese system of reciprocity. Because once the business relationship or the partnership begins, this is when Guanxi is even more important. Okay, this is when you need to continuously have this exchange of goodwill, of providing support, of granting access, to bringing people into higher level meetings and showing them that there are more opportunities, giving them recognition throughout the global organization. Whatever it is, you have to cultivate that continuous Guanxi relationship in order to form successful partnerships. And you can avoid things like, so in manufacturing, Poorly Made in China is a book that was released several years ago, and basically it discusses a phenomenon called quality fade, whereas you've entered into a relationship with a manufacturer, but over time, the quality fades. People start skimping on things, they start cutting back on certain materials, they start using cheaper materials as substitutes, and the quality of the product fades over time. Okay. Now, if you're doing services or it's not a manufacturing situation, I've noticed something that I call goodwill extraction. Okay. So we've all said that the system of reciprocity is based on the exchange of goodwill, and goodwill extraction is what happens when Chinese people feel, after the relationship has begun, after the contract has been signed, they feel that something is inequitable or unfair. Now, whether it's actually unfair or inequitable is irrelevant. It's all about how they feel. And if they feel that they didn't get a good deal, if they feel you're not continuing to invest the right effort and the right mind share and the right resources and the right support in making the partnership successful, your demands are too much and they're incurring additional costs because of your demands, what's going to happen over time is Chinese people are clever. They understand the end-to-end value chain within China. And if they feel that the relationship is inequitable or unfair, they will figure out a way to get what they think is theirs. Now, what happens is we perceive that as unethical behavior and corruption. But the reality is they are just extracting additional value that they feel is rightfully theirs out of the value chain. And most Americans who can't get involved in that level of depth, they don't have the language skills, they don't have the Guanxi relationships, they don't have relationships with the government, they don't know all the local Chinese stakeholders. There's simply no way to prevent goodwill extraction. The only way to do it is to prevent it by continuing to cultivate the Guanxi relationships and to find the right partner in the beginning by aligning on process as opposed to trying to align on values. Okay, so this is kind of the last business essentials, China Business Essentials Blueprint video. What we wanted to do is just give you some really basic ideas on why you will experience and perceive the things that you experience when you go to China, and not to misinterpret the behavior of Chinese in the incorrect cultural context, which basically means don't judge them for how they behave. Try to figure out how you can make adjustments to your own attitude, mindset, and approach to help them behave differently, because then it works for both parties. Okay? Again, looking forward to hearing your questions and any comments that you may have. Again, this is just kind of the essentials blueprint. We have a lot more in-depth material where we'll get into details and case studies and examples and help you really develop two things. Help you develop a mindset for China business and help you become a master of cross-cultural performance. And when you combine the intersection of these two elements, you will be able to not only crush it in China, you will be able to do it predictably and consistently.